A very warm welcome, everyone. On behalf of the BCLT, the British Centre for Literary Translation, I am delighted to host and chair this book launch. We're here to celebrate this wonderful volume of Uruguayan Theatre in Translation, both theory and practice, by Dr. Sophie Stevens. This volume sits at the intersection of three disciplines: translation studies, Latin American studies, and theatre or drama studies. And we're going to try and address these three areas in the book launch today. So first of all, I'm going to introduce the speakers this afternoon. I am joined by Sophie Stevens, is a Liverpool Early Career Fellow in the School of Literature, Drama and Creative Writing at the University of East Anglia. Her research project investigates the work of Latin American women dramatists in order to explore the links between activism, performance, digital networking and translation. She's a member of the Out of the Wings collective and is also an associate researcher on the Language Acts and World Making project. Her translations have been presented at Barron's Court Theatre, the Out of the Wings Festival, New Spanish Playwriting Festival, Cervantes Theatre, and Casa Latin American Theatre Festival, Southwark Playhouse. Welcome, Sophie. We're also joined this afternoon by Gail Bulman. Gail Bulman is Associate Professor of Spanish in the Department of Languages, Literatures and Linguistics at Syracuse University, where she teaches courses on Latin American theatre and literature. She is Principal Investigator of the Language Matters Research Initiative. She is currently a Fulbright Global Scholar conducting research into microteatro in Peru, Argentina and Spain. Very welcome, Gail. And we're also joined by Professor Catherine Boyle. Catherine is Professor of Latin American Cultural Studies at King's College London, where she also is the head of the Department for Languages, Literatures and Cultures. She's also the director of the Centre for Language Acts and World Making, which continues the work of the AHRC-funded project with the same name. She is director of the Out of the Wings collective. And we are also going to be joined today by Robert Carson, who is Associate Professor of Drama at the University of East Anglia. He is a theatre and opera director. He is also the Artistic Director of Noise, New Opera in Scotland events. This forms the basis of his research. Through the company, he commissions new opera composed for specific communities. Very warm welcome, Robert. We're also going to be joined today by three actors: Lanna Joffrey, Richard Glaves and Kate Eaton. So this is how the launch is going to work. First of all, we're going to have a first part where we're going to discuss some questions. And this is going to run for approximately 20 minutes. Then there's going to be a part two for approximately 15 or 20 minutes, where Sophie will introduce the play Ready or Not by Estela Golovchenko, which she herself translated into English. And we're going to hear actors read rehearsed reading scenes 3, 4 and 5. This rehearsed reading has been directed by Camila Ymay González. Camila is a London-based theatre director and practitioner from Chile. She is lecturer in Latin American Studies at the University of Reading and a member of the Out of the Wings Theatre Collective. She's also the director of the Reading Today, and previously has directed a rehearsed reading of this play at the Cervantes Theatre in 2017 as part of the Out of the Wings Festival. So this part, as I said, is going to take up between 15 and 20 minutes, which will be followed by the third part and the last part of this launch, which is going to be, again, a discussion of the reading with specific questions geared towards the pedagogy that the book proposes. That is to say, the book in the classroom and how drama students can profit from it. After which we're going to open up the platform for questions from the audience. So a note to all participants: if you have any questions that you want to direct at any of the speakers today, you need to use the Q&A function. If you have any comments that you want to make or links that you want to share, then just directly use the chat function. Great. Let's move on to the first part of this launch. Sophie, I wanted to start off by asking you a question about the book. Tell us about the book, how you structured it, and the work it contains.
Thanks, Ceci. Hi, everyone, and thanks, Ceci, again, and the BCLT for those for hosting this and for welcoming us today. It's great to be doing this, and hello to everyone tuning in from wherever you are. So this book really provides an introduction to Uruguayan theatre, particularly for people who may not have worked with it or studied it before. It contains 3 full translations of plays by Uruguayan authors: Dancing Alone Every Night by Raquel Diana, Ready or Not by Estela Golovchenko, which we'll hear some of today, and The Library by Carlos Maggi. It also contains 3 chapters of analysis, which places each one of these plays in dialogue with another play. So overall, you have 3 full play translations plus a detailed analysis of 6 plays. And I analysed these plays in their original context and then through a process of translation, in which I provide insights into the translation strategies that I applied. And I also discuss how translation creates a kind of afterlife for the plays. And that's one of the concepts that I deal with in the book. So the book chapters alternate between translations and chapters of analysis in order to really put the theory and practice in dialogue with each other. And I think we'll come back to that idea a bit later. So rather than me kind of trying to explain everything to you, I thought I might just, once I finish this section, put a link in the chat to the webpage for the book, where you can also, if you scroll down, see the content. So you'll see the different plays and also how those chapters of analysis are then interspersed with the translations. I think it's really important to say that this book is the evolution of a PhD thesis, which I completed at King's College London and supervised by Catherine, who is here today. She's zoomed out, but she's zooming back in. I think there was a slight connection problem. But I hope that by having plays in full English translation alongside the analysis of these plays, that people can really engage with how dynamic and varied Uruguayan theatre is. But it's also an invitation for people to work on these plays, produce them, and to research more Uruguayan theatre. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Yeah, one of the questions I wanted to ask in connection with your wonderful introduction to the book is precisely about the structure and how innovative it is, because generally you have books which deal with the criticism of the theatre and quotations from the plays that the critic criticizes or discusses are usually in Spanish, whereas here you have the stage-ready translations within the same volume. So this is great news, I think, for all disciplines concerned, for translation studies, for drama or theatre studies, and also for Latin American studies. Gail, I've got a question for you. How does this book make a significant contribution to Latin American studies, precisely?
Well, first of all, thank you to the organizers for inviting me to participate, and congratulations to Sophie and to Legenda Press for this gift to Latin American studies. Uruguayan theater and translation makes a significant contribution to Latin American studies for several reasons. First of all, the book includes in-depth analyses, as Sophie mentioned, of 6 important Uruguayan plays spanning the 20th and 21st centuries. The rich analyses and close readings of these 6 Uruguayan plays could be a book in itself because of the knowledge of Uruguayan theater that they bring to Latin American and non-Latin American theater scholars and practitioners as well. So some of these plays are analyzed for the first time ever in this book. Some others, such as the analyses of Mi Hijo el Doctor and La Biblioteca, have been studied before, but Sophie's readings of them add new dimensions to the scholarship and offer new ways of approaching these older Uruguayan texts. Thus, her book brings important knowledge about Uruguayan theater to English-speaking audiences. In addition to these close readings, the book includes new English translations of 3 extraordinary Uruguayan plays, 2 of which had not been translated previously. So Sophie's book not only translates these texts, in the process she makes Uruguayan culture, history, politics, and the arts more readable and more understandable, not only in the UK, but also in other English-speaking cultures. Again, these translations alone could also be a book of their own. But in addition to this, Sophie's book is an excellent manual on translation theory and practice, which makes its contributions go far beyond Uruguayan or Latin American scholarship. As I'm sure Professor Boyle will discuss, the knowledge about translation as a scholarly endeavor, as a cultural good, and as a craft that Dr. Stevens brings to the table with this book is meticulously researched, critically reflected upon, tested out in practice, and so clearly and eloquently presented that she offers to even the most novice of translators a guide to translation from and into any languages and cultures. So Sophie examines translation through a critical lens, exploring specific translation techniques, examining the ways that the original and target cultures inform each other, showing the multiplicity inherent in theatrical texts as they move across languages and borders, and focusing on the way a play's form or structure aids in the translation of contents and themes. She focuses on translation as both a process and as a critical tool of analysis that can offer greater understanding, not only about Uruguayan theater, but also about both Uruguayan culture and the target culture, in this case, the United Kingdom. She demonstrates in each chapter how to accomplish a successful translation. That is one that looks back and forth between the original text and the history, culture, and politics that inform it, and the new target culture and history as well as the target culture's debates and shifts at the times of translation. And so also another important contribution of Uruguayan theater and translation is that it seamlessly integrates and prioritizes Uruguayan women playwrights, who, as in other national theater contexts, have not received the attention they're due. So through this book and her other publications, Sophie has brought much deserved international recognition to specific Uruguayan playwrights and performance artists such as Raquel Diana and Estela Golovchenko, among others. And then lastly, and very importantly, the book is just meticulously researched, as I mentioned. It's grounded in dialogues with previously established translation theory. It's extremely well written and easy to follow. The writing is clear, not at all redundant. Her arguments are fluid and organized, yet each sentence is packed with information. So this volume or this book contributes in so many ways to Latin American studies. It's just a very rich contribution, and so congratulations and thank you, Sophie.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Gail. You must be very proud of your achievement, Sophie, and to be read so meticulously by someone like Gail here. It's really very rewarding. And a final question for Catherine. Catherine, how does this book create productive connections? We've been talking about these connections, but how does this book create these connections between or across Latin American studies, translation studies, and theatre studies?
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, yes.
Thank you. Sorry, just as the meeting was beginning, my internet crashed, so I'm a bit anxious. Everything's
No
working.
worries.
Anyway, it's lovely to be here, and it's great to be celebrating Sophie's really excellent book. After Gail's really fantastically eloquent speech there, I just want to add a few things. I think that, so the question about how the book creates productive connections across Latin American studies, translation studies, theatre studies, I think comes from the fact that in its very conception, the book is interdisciplinary. And it's interdisciplinary partly because of what Gail was saying before, that theatre is multiple. There's an integral multiplicity in the theatre act from its conception through to its realization. And I think because Sophie roots this in a theatre and theatre act, then it inevitably becomes interdisciplinary. I was thinking of the ways where this book is rooted, where the research is rooted, and it's rooted in all these places we've talked about. So it's rooted in Latin American studies, Latin American literary studies. It's rooted in the study of the Spanish language, which is really important to state, I think. It's rooted in cultural and historical studies. again, if you read from the beginning, you'll see that Sophie really connects and thinks about these plays as cultural production being produced at certain moments in history and then moving across history. And of course, it's so rooted in translation itself. And I know for a fact that from the beginning of Sophie's research, the idea of the dissemination of the work and the idea of working in as an educator in this area was at the heart of what Sophie wanted to do as well, and has done really successfully. So from one seemingly one object of study, we move across a number of areas, and all directly from this object, the Uruguayan Theatre. I wanted that so that we can go on with other things. The one thing I wanted to say about how this creative productive, the productive connections are made, is in the actual materiality of the book. And I like one of the many things that I like about the book and about the way that Sophie, the editors have worked with Sophie and allowed this lovely creative intellectual freedom, is that you have chapters and then the translations. So the translations aren't an appendage; they're not added on. They're not there as something other. They're absolutely in the book. And if you were to choose to pick up this book and think, I'm looking for plays to read, we'll come back to this later, or to perform, you can read the book in that way. If you're thinking about Latin American cultural or historical or literary studies, you can read the book in that way. If you're looking for translation theory and practice, as Gail has mentioned, you can read the book in that way. So I think that's one of the ways. The materiality of the book allows us to follow this object of study and to move to really be very conscious of these connections.
Wonderful, Catherine. Yeah, lots of food for thought, because we are celebrating the book, and it's very easy to just think in terms of what the book says, but actually the book in itself and its structure and how it has been put together, how thoughtfully and critically it's been put together. I think this is worth thinking about, and thinking about that question in particular. Why was it so important for you, Sophie, to have both the theory and practice in this one volume? And did you have to negotiate? Did you have to convince the publishers that this is the way you wanted it to be? How did that come about?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks so much, Gail and Catherine, for those really wonderful and insightful comments. And it's just great to have been working with you for so long. So thank you so much. I think there's a sort of really simple answer as to why it had to be like this in some ways, which is that's precisely the way that I was working. So while I said this came from a PhD thesis, during my thesis I was translating, I was carrying out the contextual and dramaturgical research processes, and I was writing about those processes, not exactly all at the same time, but more or less at the same time. And so for me, this is how the work was developed, and I wanted the theory and practice to be constantly in dialogue as they were through me, through what I was doing. But I think there are a couple of other things that are worth mentioning about this, and that will come to your question about the publisher as well, because when you do a PhD, you also then do a viva, a sort of final oral examination, several months after you've submitted the PhD. And the reason that was significant for this book, or this what became the book, was firstly because the discussions with the examiners and the kind of questions that they asked me really sort of made concrete and made me more certain of the fact that actually the theory and practice were really in dialogue, and you couldn't see one without the other. And also for the arguments that I was trying to make, these two aspects of my research would have to be together in any future publication. And so that really, talking through that with them and then with other colleagues after the viva, really gave me the confidence to pitch this in this way to a publisher. And I'm really, really grateful that Legenda were open to it. They've edited it beautifully, as Catherine said. So I think it took me, as with any book project, you do your research and work out who you might want to target. But this particular series, the transcript series, is very open to these kinds of discussions of theory and practice, and also different ways of thinking about moving across cultures, which is precisely what the book does. But that gap between the PhD submission and the Viva, and then obviously making a book proposal and things, was also significant in my case, because in that time, the plays included had been in the PhD submission had been through different types of readings, but I actually got the opportunity to develop one of them, Dancing Alone Every Night, for a rehearsed reading before an audience with Camila Ymay González, who directed the reading today, and so we've collaborated in lots of different ways. And I had the plans already made to do that with one of the others, and then later with the library I did an online reading, and so those rehearsal periods with actors helped me to really refine the translations. They got even better, but also being in the rehearsal room and hearing them as readings after a 2-day rehearsal period really helped me to see just how beautiful and wonderful these plays were and their potential for full performances. So it made me even more determined to get them out there, because I already started to see the ways in which they were connecting so fruitfully with audiences that were based in the UK. And so I was really determined for them to be out there so people could work with them in different ways. But I think the final thing to say on this, and the theory and practice, is I suppose there was a sort of a very practical, but also, I couldn't find the right word. I'm going to go with this, and I think this is a sort of very ethical impulse behind publishing the book with translations and with theory, which is that it's very difficult to get plays published in any language. And if I could do something to find a way to get these plays out there, then I should try to do that. I also felt a sort of real sense of responsibility and integrity, because the entire book is about how dynamic and brilliant Uruguayan theatre is, and then no one can get hold of any of the texts in English, then the book could only do part of what I wanted it to do. And what I wanted it was for it to be a resource for teachers, for students, for actors, for theatre companies, to use this as a starting point for their own research, their own work, and their own productions.
That's wonderful, Sophie. I mean, that's absolutely great, and I think I can't really agree more with all the things that you're saying here, and the framing of the structure of the book in ethical terms. You know, thinking that a lot of the work that you do in the book is actually stemming from your reflection on the practice of translation. It has, you know, very much it is the product of practice research. So you have to have that practice, the result, the output of that practice in the book, i.e. the translations themselves. And you also answered my question about this question of the stage readiness of the plays that you have. You know, you've actually very nicely described that process of translating for your PhD during your PhD, which, you know, gives you that luxury of time. But then the real work begins when you are refining the translation on the basis of what happens in the rehearsal room, you know, whether it's an online rehearsal room or whether it's an actual physical rehearsal room, and you're sitting there with your script and the actors, and they are giving you feedback on the words you've written. So I think the question of the stage readiness of these translations, I think, is paramount. And so thank you so much for explaining that. I'm sure that we're going to go back to the question of the process after the listening to the rehearsed reading this afternoon, and we're going to go back to asking questions of Robert, specifically about how this book can actually serve this pedagogical tool in the drama classroom. Great. I think now we're going to move very swiftly to the second part of our launch this afternoon. And as I anticipated, we are going to be reading we're going to be listening to a rehearsed reading of scenes 3, 4, and 5 from the play Ready or Not by Estela Golovchenko. So, Sophie, I believe you want to say a few words just to introduce the play and the scenes that we're going to hear this afternoon.
Yeah, I'll just say a little bit more, and I'll also introduce our actors, who you did introduce before, but I'll tell you which characters they'll be playing. So in this extract, we'll see 3 characters: the mother, played by Kate Eaton, the father, played by Richard Glaves, and the daughter, played by Lanna Joffrey. There's one other character in the play who doesn't appear here, but who is mentioned, and that's Santiago. So Ready or Not depicts a meeting between a young woman and her father, whom she's not seen in person for many years since they were separated during the civic military dictatorship. This is because he actively chose to leave the family behind, because both the mother and father were left-wing political activists, and the father left the family with the intention of finding a way for the whole family to escape to Argentina. But the plan never came to fruition. And then in the widespread repression which took place during that period, the mother disappeared as a victim of that repression. And the daughter doesn't know what happened to her, so she hasn't been found, but they also don't know if she was killed. The play is set then in the present day, when the father is now in the role of senator in the Uruguayan parliament. And so he is a public figure and he's a politician. So what we see is a confrontation between the daughter and the father in the present day, where she tries to understand the man before her and how she can reconcile that with the father that she knew. So the play portrays the difficulty of reconciliation, both with an estranged relative, but also with a different version of the past, because one of the consequences of this separation is that there's been no dialogue between them. The influence of the past on the present situation is emphasized through the use of a series of flashbacks to the daughter's childhood. So these disrupt the meeting taking place in the present day. So the extract that we'll see or hear takes place near the beginning of the play, and we'll see how the scenes alternate between flashbacks in the past and the present day meeting in the senator's office. So when we start the reading, the daughter is a child in the past, and she's with her mother, who's trying to help her understand why the father has had to go into hiding in a different place from them. We'll see that the mother frames this as a game of hide and seek, and that's where the title comes from. It's a reference to what we would call out in British English before we go to find others. Ready or not, here I come. And then in the second scene, we see the daughter as an adult confronting her father, who she hasn't seen for about 20 years. So I think that that's everything for the introduction, and I'll hand over to the actors. Thank you very much.
Ready or Not by Estela Golovchenko, translated by Sophie Stevens. Scene 3, The Past. In the refuge, an isolated place that is used only as a hiding place. The mother and the daughter, as a little girl, play a simple game together.
I want to see him.
Who?
Daddy, who else?
He's fine. Don't worry.
Is he alone?
He's with some of his friends.
So he's happy.
Of course, he has us.
But we never see each other.
It's not because he doesn't want to, but because he can't.
Why can't he come here?
Because he's hiding.
So let's go and find him.
We can't. We're hiding too.
Who from?
From the people who are counting.
Let's go and hide with Daddy then.
But if we go and hide with him, we'll give him away, and no one is allowed to know where he is.
Just like Santiago. He came to hide with me behind the tree, and they found us both. He should have stayed where he was. They would have only found him, and then I would have freed him.
Who's Santiago?
Santiago is my boyfriend.
Oh, is he? Santiago.
It's a secret. Don't tell Daddy or Nana or anyone. Promise me?
I promise. How long has he been your boyfriend?
I don't know. He never said it, but I know he's my boyfriend.
How do you know?
Because he always wants to play with me. Is Daddy your boyfriend?
Yes.
Do you love him?
Of course I do.
You miss him?
Every day.
I can hardly remember Daddy.
What do you mean you can hardly remember him? Let's see. What colour are his eyes?
Blue.
See, you do remember. What else?
He has long hair and a beard. And it tickles me when he kisses me. And do you know what we play?
What?
Taking a really big breath and farting with our mouths like this. Who's coming to get you?
What?
You said to Nan that they could come for you at any time.
It's true. The soldiers could come for me.
What for?
Ask me some questions.
Well, why would they have to take you away? They can ask you whatever they want here at home.
Oh, it's not the same. They have to take me away.
How long for?
I don't know.
Who will I be left with?
Nana,
When will Daddy be back?
when all this is over, he's going to come.
Where will they take you?
I don't know. I'd rather not know.
But I would, so I can come and visit you.
It's best if you don't.
How will we let Daddy know?
He'll find out, don't worry.
But you'll come back, won't you?
Of course.
Will you bring me a present?
What would you like me to bring you?
A doll? One that has eyes that open and close and with real hair like yours.
If Daddy can't come when I go, you'll stay with your Nana, okay? But don't be angry with Daddy if he doesn't come. It's not because he doesn't love you. He adores you, just like I do. But there are times when he can't be with you.
Why?
Because we have things to do.
What things?
Things.
Bad things?
Think that Daddy and I could really do something bad.
Be quiet.
What?
Listen, I think I hear him coming.
Who?
Daddy.
Scene 4. The present. The father comes up to his office surreptitiously. Without being seen, he observes his daughter talking to Santiago. He is evidently moved, but holds back his emotions. Then he enters properly.
Hello.
Hello.
I got held up a bit. I'm very sorry to have made you wait.
It's fine.
The father makes a gesture to Santiago to leave. Once Santiago leaves the office, the awkwardness between father and daughter is palpable. Both characters take the opportunity, when the other one is distracted, to examine the other closely, trying to identify in their features, gestures, and words the ties which unite them. In this confrontation, the father never loses his characteristic serene air. His attitude is more one of submission. Deep down, he wants his daughter to attack him, to destroy him, to free him from guilt.
That young man will go far.
He's gifted.
He's pretentious. You can tell he learned from you.
You're being prejudiced.
No, he showed his true colors. We had a nice long chat. I was surprised that he knew very little about our relationship, and stranger still, he knew nothing about your previous life.
You told him about it?
No, it would take too long. Besides, I don't think he's interested. In any case, you should have told him.
I don't go around telling people my life story to everyone.
Oh, I've never realized that silence could be such an anesthetic. Well, obviously, I live in a different world to you. You close the door and you're on to the next thing. Now, I understand why he's never going to ask you anything. He doesn't have principles. He doesn't have contact with the past. He won't even ask you out of curiosity. Tell me, honestly, don't you ever want to tell him why you lost so many years of your life?
I don't want us to talk about the past. There are things that we cannot change. We both know that.
Yes, you're right.
I know that this is a difficult situation, so I'm grateful to you for coming.
It's no problem. I'm an adult, and I know how to respond when I'm needed.
I hadn't thought about it like that, but the truth is I do need you. After everything that's happened, you're all I have.
And the one thing you don't have.
You're my daughter.
Biologically. But I don't have a father, or rather the father I remember is nothing like the person who is standing in front of me now.
You don't know me.
I'm the only one who knows what you're really like. I know your absence, your back, your silence. That's why it drives me mad when they talk so well of you. Nobody would ever imagine that behind your generous and kind appearance, there's a complete bastard.
You talk just...
The way I learned to. You weren't there to teach me.
Someone full of bitterness and hate taught you.
Hate grows of its own accord. It didn't need anyone to nurture it. Besides, that someone you mentioned saved my life. If it wasn't for Nan, I wouldn't be here, that's for sure.
I know, I'll always be grateful to her for that. It's a shame she's brainwashed you.
And who brainwashed you? Because you didn't used to be like this, from what Mum told me in the few things I remember.
I'm the same as always.
If you were the same, then you wouldn't be here, sitting in that seat that makes your bum and your brain go to sleep.
I had to do what I did. It was the only way for me to feel like I was alive again. There are no halfway points in this. You're either for or against, and I wasn't prepared to carry on losing.
With people like you, we're going to lose forever.
At this stage in my life, I can tell you that nothing is forever. You don't win or lose for eternity.
To think that the last time you called me, I created a whole argument to try to understand you. Not to justify your actions. There is no justification for what you did. And you know what? In some ways, I understood you. I said to myself, it's fine. He did his own thing, found a way to make a living. At the end of the day, he has the right to live as he pleases. You never bothered me. Fine. But for you to erase history, our history, you were the protagonist? That I can't understand. That's why you're nothing like my father, or at least nothing like the father I remember.
Let's not talk about me. I've had enough of my things.
From what I can tell, things are going very well for you. Not at all like they are for me.
That's why I called you. I know that you and your grandmother are going through a difficult time, and I thought that...
Since I was born, I've been going through a difficult time. And do you know who is responsible?
I am responsible! We have to talk. We have to do it calmly. It's now or never.
I don't think there's any point in me staying here a minute longer. It's a waste of time.
There's something I want to give you, and I'd like you to accept it. Please, for the father I once was.
The one I knew didn't have anything to give except love. And what's more, he demanded social justice. And now, what are you? A stranger, a second-rate politician who votes against the very things that he once risked his life for. I don't want anything from him.
Would you have preferred me dead?
You don't know how many times I wished you were.
Scene 5, the past, in the refuge.
Is Daddy dead?
Where did you get that idea?
Santiago at school told me that Daddy must be dead.
Who told him that rubbish?
His mum told him.
It's a lie.
How do we know he's alive?
The mother takes out a plain piece of paper and pretends to read an imaginary letter from the father.
Because he sent us a letter.
Let me see.
Let me read it to you.
I want to read it.
You won't be able to read his writing. You know what his writing's like when he's in a rush.
Well, what does it say?
To my darling daughter.
He didn't write it to you.
Let me read. Oh, to my darling daughter and beloved wife.
Beloved means more than darling, doesn't it?
Oh, it's the same.
No, it's not the same to say someone is your darling as it is to say they are your beloved.
Okay, it's not the same, but it means the same thing.
Well, he must love you more than he loves me.
Oh, hold on. I read it incorrectly. It says, to my darling wife and my beloved daughter. I'm writing this letter to let you know that I'm fine. I need to be here for a little while longer, but when I come back, I'll bring some presents with me. A doll with real hair and eyes that open and close. For my beloved little girl, who I miss every day and can't wait to see very soon.
Doesn't he say anything else?
No.
He doesn't say where he is.
No.
Why?
It's a secret, just like the one you told me.
Which one?
The one about Santiago.
Shh. Don't say anything, so Nana doesn't find out. Are we going to write to Daddy?
Okay.
She takes out a piece of paper and a pen. They both get ready to write.
What are you going to write to him?
My darling Daddy.
Only darling?
Ah, give me another one. I made a mistake.
Oh, no. You'll take a long time if you carry on like that. There you go.
To my beloved Daddy, when are you coming back? Mummy and I are waiting for you.
Whilst the daughter continues writing and speaking her words softly, the mother speaks aloud, as if she were reading her own letter to the father.
We miss you so much. Sometimes I wonder if all this is worth it. So much suffering, so much anxiety, and nothing changes. Don't think I'm feeling defeated. I'm not. I still gladly fight for the cause. But at night, when our daughter holds my hand tightly and I hear her breathing, I think, how much longer? I want to wake up with you next to me, just stroke your beard, your smiling mouth. I want to walk outside without a care in the world, look at the sky and not worry about anything, breathe in the air. I want to live. When we decided to resist, we knew full well what could happen to us. Now that I'm living the reality of it every day in my own skin, your skin, and especially in the skin of our daughter, which is what hurts the most, the feeling of helplessness overwhelms me and I feel like I'm going to faint. My only comfort is thinking that she will survive us, that she will make sure to tell the world what we fought for.
Thank you so much. That was excellent. That was really moving. Thank you so much. This is the only problem, that you can't hear all the applause. I instantly started clapping, but I'm sure there are lots of applause from our audience members as well. Thank you so much. That was excellent.
Yes, I want to join in the thanks. I mean, it's incredibly moving, and it was wonderfully performed. And yeah, thank you so much for giving us this excerpt from a wonderful play by Estela Golovchenko. I can't pronounce the surname. It seems Golovchenko, wonderfully translated by Sophie here. And I want to move on to the next part, the third part of this book launch, and invite Robert to say a few things about his reaction to the reading. As a professor in drama and a theatre and opera director, I would love to hear from you, Robert. What was your reaction to the reading?
I thought it was great, and thank you very much to the actors for doing that. I thought they committed to it really well. Listening to the play, it brought to mind a couple of other plays. I don't know whether that's although of course it is, it's unique thing, but there are certain things that started dancing through my head. One of them was the play Death and the Maiden by Ariel Dorfman, where a young woman confronts the person who had been her torturer during the dictatorship, So this notion of how do you coexist in a society that has seen these terrible things, and what does that mean for the individuals who are part of it? And I remember the play, the last scene is set in the opera house in Buenos Aires, I think, where she sits next to this man. So suddenly we were in a very cultured place where these two people have experienced terrible things, and what then does she do? That play doesn't give an answer, but it poses the question and illustrates the dilemma. And I think that the other thing that went through my head was Medea, where someone has given up her life for a man who then betrays her for a more pragmatic reality. He thinks he can save everybody's lives by ditching Medea and marrying someone else. So those things went through my head. I was thinking that, okay, so what's the important thing to think about when you're directing this, so that it doesn't simply become polemic, that it's bad versus good, and how do you somehow bring the audience to understand the decisions made by the father, and whether do you think that you don't want to make the daughter too, for want of a better word, shrewish, or appear to be just this vengeful person. And it seems to me that when she comes to visit her father, she's coming through curiosity. Is coming through some desire to resolve something in her own emotional being and in her own political life. And those struck me as quite I don't know, can I possibly say Hispanic themes? Because lots of societies in Latin America have these terrible pasts of civil wars, of repression. How do people begin to occupy a civilized space together? And often the political regimes are there because they've been bolstered by powers outside of them. So that was my reaction to what we were hearing. I also thought it was very readable. I thought it was very speakable. I thought that there was a sense that the prose was appropriate, and that the words, the actual technical construction, was suited a kind of English-speaking performers. So that was exciting to hear. So that's kind of my reaction to it. And I think it's interesting when the characters sort of physically are quite attractive, and are quite you like to look at them. Are you seduced by them? It's the kind of the matinee idol and the Juve lead are somehow what are our real actual physical impressions of those people. And I think the play allows for all of those possibilities. That allows for actors to, as it were, build on that, and build on a structure that can be useful for performance. So that's that was what I was thinking about, and that was my reaction to it.
That's great. Yeah, that's great, Robert. Thank you for that. And because of course you have used the text with your drama students. So how was your experience of using this text with your drama students at UEA?
It was great. There's a kind of problem, or a challenge, shall we say? When I was younger, most of the time I spent doing foreign plays, partly because I'm Scottish and I didn't want to do English plays, so I felt much happier doing German plays, Russian plays, Spanish plays, whatever. But I think we live in a different world now, where the concepts of appropriation, the concepts of responsible interpretation and representation are an issue. So it's more difficult to do a play from a different culture, a different language, so it was great knowing. I've always wanted to make some sort of real contact with the BCLT. You know, we're in the same department, and it seemed odd, you know, that there was no communication. And then when Sophie came, it was exciting to work with her, because it seemed that there was there was someone who could handle those issues, who had a profound understanding of what Uruguayan plays might be. And they're always trying to get the students to broaden their idea of what a play is, and indeed what the world is. You know, so you know, we started by, you know, Sophie started by showing the map of Uruguay. You know, this is where it is. You know, it's another world. It's another country. And it seems to me that our understanding of Spain and Hispania, or whatever, you know, you refer to these things as, we're very ignorant. You know, I remember when I started learning Spanish, it was like Narnia. You go through the wardrobe and it's a completely different world, completely different concerns, a completely different way of looking at the world, with a profound and wonderful history. And so it was an opportunity to bring those issues, or bring that notion of what a Spanish-speaking play is to the students. And and the plays were eminently speakable. They worked very well. They had the ability to delight an audience, to entertain an audience, to make an audience think. And one of them was an English story, which was very interesting. So this Dancing Alone Every Night was one of the ones that we did. And so this idea that something that had taken place in London, I thought might create a kind of link, a kind of way into thinking about seeing this story told through the eyes of someone who's, in a way, not objectifying, but you know, when people write from outside a culture, they can show something about a culture that those who are inside of it can't. And so you know, that Spanish expression that white people don't have families, you know, so I could understand perhaps part of the resonance of that play in South America, or why that story was particularly attractive. It's like, how could someone be so alone? Which for us Anglo-Saxon Celts is kind of, it's very easy to be alone. You know, I mean, our families are more fractured, they're more dispersed, for better or worse. You know, it's different. It's a different kind of world. So so my experience of working with the students, some of the students loved it. Some of the students couldn't see the point. They didn't understand why should we bother ourselves with this? We're not being assessed on it. You know, the usual student problems. But I think you always do work for the people who will appreciate it, because you know, it's like we are presenting them with a unique and wonderful opportunity. And also the whole thing about translation. I don't know whether, you know, at one time people used to say, well, translation's only good for 10 years in the theatre because the language moves and change. And that when we're doing Ibsen, etc., we always get contemporary playwrights to put a particular slant on it, or to bring it into the here and now. So it was an opportunity for them to think about translation if they thought that was a thing that they had to. You know, the other terrible thing we have is, you know, the curse of speaking English. You know, we can go all over the bloody world and, you know, don't have to even think about another language. So one was sort of hoping to challenge some of that, or not challenge, but you know, allow people to think about how do they have, what's their relation to these different worlds, and being drama students, hopefully you would hope that they would, through drama, that is their other language. So in the end, it was a very positive experience, and I think the students did really well. I got COVID for the performance, so I wasn't there, which was very sad. But Yeah, I mean, I think that I'd love to do more projects like that, and have people actually involved who have done the translation, or who are, have that, as it were, can we call it authority? That when that they know what they're talking about, and as a director, you always kind of think, well, I see it in this way. Is that reading? Is that justified? Is that, or can we think about it in those particular ways? So it was a great experience, and
Yeah.
so
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I know that Sophie was actually in the classroom with the students, and I think that what an opportunity, what a wonderful opportunity for the students, and especially for those who are difficult to convert, to translated literature, who are very much monocultural, monolingual. I think it's a wonderful opportunity, and of course, I mean, this is not the first time that Sophie is actually at UEA, where she's been for a few years now. But I remember that back in, I think it was 2018, I was trying to sort of organize this mini sort of theatre in translation series, because I was very much aware that we had some possibilities that we were not exploring at BCLT, like, for example, having the drama part of the school in next door, basically, and having the drama studio as a place. So I remember that Sophie came with Catherine, and also Catherine Gregor, who has had some experience translating theatre, and we had this wonderful round table. And then, of course, when BCLT appointed Olivia Hollowell and William Gregory as inaugural translators in residence, again, we started another conversation, having William also take part online, because we were, during lockdown, we were teaching online in the autumn semester of 2020. But I think, the book is inviting those collaborations in departments like LDC, like the School of Literature, Drama and Creative Writing, precisely because we have the student actors, we have the theatre directors, and we have the translators as well, bridging the worlds. So that's great. And I would like to move on to Gail and ask you about your reaction to the reading, and precisely what stood out for you this time.
Great. Yes. So first of all, wonderful performance. I'm so impressed with the actors and just how they made this text come alive and really gave this play an afterlife, as Sophie would say, for me especially, but for many people, I'm sure. I would say three things stand out for me. And Sophie discusses these in the book, but they really came through in this performance. First of all, that translation is a collaborative process, and that Sophie's translation is really excellent, but here the actors just made it come alive. You can clearly see here that this was the team effort that Sophie talks about in her book, between the playwright, the translator, director, and the actors. I mean, it was wonderful. Secondly, in the chapter about this translation, Sophie writes about the focus on the form, and how the form is really a significant and integral part of the translation process, and it allows the translator to make creative choices. So here you see it clearly, for example, in the playfulness of the text that Sophie also talks about in the book. The actors just worked with that really, really well. And that's inherent in the original script. So they did such a fantastic job working with that playfulness. And finally, the flashbacks, which of course must be very hard to stage, I would think, but totally successful here. And Sophie talks about how the flashbacks both fill in the gaps, but also suggest a lack of completeness, no? And so you see this here, and she talks also about the transitions between the past and present scenes, and how they're mediated by the repetitions or questioning, at the end of the last scene. And we saw that in the scenes chosen here, as the father asks at the end of scene 4, "Would you have preferred me dead?" And the daughter replies, "You don't know how many times I wished you were." And then the next scene begins with, "Is Daddy dead?" the child asks. And so, this is all in the original text by the Uruguayan playwright, but also it's really brought forth in this English translation. So great job. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about that myself. That transition of the voice of the character, Lanna. I'm in awe of you, of how you negotiated that so smoothly, so effectively. Because I think that must be really challenging to do. And going back to that question, Gail, and what Robert was also saying, that the play so successfully avoids the polemic because it doesn't give you the answer. It doesn't actually tell you the daughter is right and the father is wrong. It just leaves that to be resolved in the audience's mind and heart, basically. It just shows you these flashbacks, and it's such an effective way of presenting the aftermath of the conflict of the the military dictatorship, and how we all in all of our Latin American countries we have to negotiate daily. So I thought that came out really forcefully in the reading. Sophie, can you tell us a little bit about how you worked with the play, and what was it like to develop this translation, and then you had published it, and then you walked into the classroom with Robert, and you had another series of rehearsals. So how did that work for you?
Thanks, yeah, and thanks, yeah. I know what happens in this play, and I found that so incredibly moving, and felt so involved in that reading, and and kind of wanting more. So thank you so much. I suppose, there are lots of translators here, so the question of when is the translation finished, there are as many different answers to that as you can imagine. But I think on the question of working with students and with Robert on it, it had been through lots of revisions by that point. It had been through the rehearsed reading, so I felt pretty confident about it. But of course, the questions that come from students, and that's one of the joys of working with students in any context, but I think particularly with theatre translation, the questions that come are just help you to think about it in different ways, and think about new perspectives or new ways in which the language is functioning for them. So what they pick up on, what stands out to them, which is why that kind of very simple question of what stands out and what's so memorable is actually really interesting, because it's often very different things for different people. And that's what made it so exciting to work with the students, because it's like, okay, well, you got that, you identified that, what are you going to do with that for a reading? And they worked really brilliantly, and it was just such a pleasure to work with them, and a joy to see what they did. So I think some of the challenges of translating this text have actually already been picked up on, which is the character of the daughter, and seeing her as a child and then an adult, trying to make sense of this experience of her past, confronting her father, and trying to understand how he could possibly have gone from being an activist to a member of parliament. And I really worked hard in analysing these two moments of her life that we see on stage, to create a stage language in English which would enable an actor to move through those differences and similarities between her as a child and an adult. And one of the ways in which the text helps with this is precisely what Gail and Ceci have already been talking about, is that the transitions are constructed beautifully in Estela's original text. And I knew this from reading it, I knew it from the start. And I really got to test that when I was working on this as a rehearsed reading with actors. And I think by really working on those connections in my translation, I created a way for the actor to move between past and present, and do that confidently, to then take the audience with them, so that we also believe in those transitions, and we believe in the different spaces, different times, and that we are also part of that, and that this is the same character. And so those connections between the scenes allow the echoes of the past to resonate in the scenes in the present, and we move with her, and we understand the significance of these questions that are left unanswered, that she comes with so forcefully when she meets her father. So I think that was where the work was, and I think, Lanna, you did an amazing job. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sophie. That was great. I really love the use of stage language. More than translating Spanish into English, you are translating the stage language of Spanish into the stage English that you need, that the actors need in order to bring these characters alive. So I really commend that use of stage language. I want to ask Catherine a question now, precisely about the reaction to the reading, your reaction to the reading, Catherine, and how this book might work and pave the way for future readings and performances. What's your take on that?
I think I say the same thing over and over again. It is the skill of actors is quite remarkable, and the skill in terms of what our actors have brought today shows us that of seeming to make something so natural. So you know that this is a stage language. It's a staged language. It's, if we can call it, it's a zoomed language in a way, And to use these little spaces, these little squares, to evoke so much is an incredibly powerful thing, and an incredibly skilled thing. And I think that those sorts of connections are really important, always to underline. And it's those skills and those very specific skills. And I think the courage of vulnerability and of going to really different places, that the text and the words and that we ask actors to go to is actually incredibly valuable in our society. So I always come back to those questions, and the play itself is moving, but that for me is very moving as well. It also gave me, I had memories of the reading of the play, directed by Camila, who also directed today, as Sophie said, and how Camila used the stage space to create these stage languages, to create the refuge, to start sort of instructing the audience in time changes and space changes, and how this relationship is in the present is built up from the past. So I remember that very clearly, because it was very skillfully and artfully done. And again, those sorts of things are really very significant when you come to thinking about a translation or any play. I think the other things are about what the play becomes. Plays are always in the act of becoming, aren't they? But what a play in translation becomes, and it becomes something that has this thread through to particular moments, to Uruguay in this case, to dictatorship, to the impact in a family. But I think the movement to another geographical moment, to another historic moment, makes it about something else. And I think a lot of theatre from other places has suffered from aboutness. Latin American plays are about violence, they're about this, they're about that, so they can't relate to us. The aboutness of a play is changing, and I think the aboutness of this play, in translation, is important to think of in a different way. People were talking about this, you're talking about the lack of question. I think one of the beautiful things about this play, and where I really rate female writers' responses to dictatorship, and they're not heard, and I want them to be heard, is that I think they're braver than many other writers in holding that place of tension, and holding that place where there's a demand for memory that won't be allowed. And you can't resolve that. This is unresolvable, but it's there, it's visceral, it's embodied, it's a memory, it's the present. And I think Estela's work, and it's wonderful that Estela is here with us today, does that. It creates this place of tension, and I think that the sensitivity of woman, who are very often called Locke, as you know, mad for trying to restore memory, for trying to say memory is part of our new democracies of justice, you know, and the memory of what's happening is really important, and not to have that sense of it's crazy to do this, but to say here's a place of embodied and lived tension that we are that this moment. And this moment is many moments, it's one moment, it's a continued moment, encapsulates. And the last thing I'll say is that that's what makes it so translatable. Because if we talk to this play only as it's about Uruguay, or only as it's about dictatorship or whatever, then we lose it. You know, and I think the skill here of, you know, of course, of the play, of Sophie's translation, of the actors, is to bring it to something where we're entering into something where we can see a direction towards somewhere else. But as translation will always do, so beautiful, take us in a direction towards something, but then take us back and place us here and now, and really ask us to ask questions about our own here and now. And not about that other here and now that lets us off the hook, about this here and now, because we can't forget that. And I think the embodiment in new voices is, you know, is what theatre translation is really, really all about. And that's what's moving and special about it. So thank you to you all for doing this today.
Thank you, Catherine. That was wonderful. I mean, I was making notes here, and I was connecting actually the materiality. We started off talking at the beginning about the materiality of the book, about having the book here and having the plays in the book, with the criticism and the context and the cultural aspects of the theatre and translation. And now we're talking about the physicality of these voices, and precisely because they are embodiment of stories, of the characters' stories. So this is really you know, wonderful in terms of closing remarks. As we move swiftly to the question and answer section of this event today, I don't know if there are any questions posted here. No questions yet, so I'm inviting anybody from the audience who have attended the event today. Have you got any questions that you would like to ask? Have the actors got any questions that they would like to ask?
I don't have a question necessarily. I just
comments.
A response comment. I think what's really exciting about drama in translation is that you introduce a country or a history, a world history, through performance and through personal stories, right? Personal narratives. And I think that's what's really exciting when I hear, you know, a whole class studied this book and studied these plays. I'm sure that they were introduced to a world history lesson through drama, which is much more exciting to learn. It's easy. It's much more digestible to explore world history through drama than it is to sit in a world history class. And so I think that that's what's really exciting about translated work, is that we're able to get a window into these countries and their history, but through this dramatic narrative. You know, working on the play myself, I obviously resonated with different things. The idea of somebody going from one world to the next to being, you know, a politician. How many times have we had people who have been one thing and then have drastically changed and become someone else? Whether it's, you know, super left to a fundamentalist, you know, and then for me also, I resonated with the idea of a silent father, because as I'm from Iran, and when we fled to the UK and then the US, my father got stuck in Iran for a year. And I had no way of knowing when he was going to come back or how he would be able to get out of the country. And he eventually did. And my mother always tells the story that once he returned, I wouldn't let him go. And if he even left to go to work, I would start sobbing because I thought he'd left again forever. And so the daughter to me very much resonated with that. And that's a Middle Eastern country, which has no relation to Uruguay, but does. And I think that's what's exciting about drama, about theater and translation, is that I can then resonate with what I've seen in a play in Uruguay with what I have now. So to me, that's what's really exciting about it. And I messaged Sophie about how wonderfully easily actable her translation is. It makes it very easy for me to play it because she's done the work for me. Actors can definitely act better when the text is fantastic. So yeah, those are the kinds of thoughts. And also I went to Syracuse, so yay. Yay, Gail.
So it's actually fascinating because we started off talking about links, and how this book, one volume, links up different disciplines, and how we end up talking about how this play links up all these personal stories, and how when you root something in the very personal, in that very moment of a particular moment, in this case, well, obviously because the play moves between the past and the present, but it is very much rooted in a place and a conflict, but it is so specific that it becomes universal. And this is thank you so much, Lanna, for sharing the story of your childhood and your experience with your father, because it just brought it to life. And thank you, Sophie, for a wonderful translation. Are there any questions? Let's see if I can check there. No questions yet. I think that probably everybody has been quite moved by the experience and the rehearsed reading. I mean, the reactions in the chat are wonderful. I mean, people are saying congratulations, bravo, applause. Yeah, and Estela's praise for Sophie. Sophie has, may I read it? Well, everybody has access to the chat, so I suppose great virtue as a translator, great skill as a translator for the theatre, and you're a great interpreter, which is fantastic. Thank you, Estela. Do you have any questions, Estela?
This is slightly embarrassing that I know that she's referring to when I read a scene of the play. And obviously I read it nowhere near as great as the actors have, but I know these texts really well. I have acted in the past, and all of those things come out, and they're just such great plays that I want them out there, even if sometimes that means me reading them. But I do, and I spend a lot of time. To talk about theatre translation process a bit more, one of the things is you spend quite a lot of time inhabiting these texts, kind of inhabiting the worlds of these texts, walking around with them in your head, saying them out loud in different ways. It's very nerve-wracking, but also a great joy to hand them over to actors and suddenly hear them in a different voice and see how that changes things and why that changes things. And all of the actors here today I've worked with in other contexts as well, and other plays, and so also those relationships that we have built up have been really fruitful, and finding people who are willing to try things out and willing to share really honestly and openly is really important. I think also this is the moment to mention that Richard, because we have worked together in lots of contexts, Richard is on the back of the book, not the front of the book, but Richard is on the back of the book and gave me permission to share that picture of him, which is great because it means there's a play. So that's the front cover of the book, has a play that by Raquel Diana that was put on in Uruguay in Spanish, and then this is a picture from the performance of that translation in England in the Omnibus Theatre in London as part of the Out of the Wings Festival, and that play, to continue talking about Afterlife, that particular play, Her Open Eyes, was then picked up by a director who was part of a director training program and wanted to work with the play in translation. And so she then actually put it on again at the Omnibus Theatre as part of her final sharing. So one of the things about getting the plays out there is that you also never know where they're going to end up, which is really exciting and really wonderful. And you may just, and I suppose for Richard, you never know where you're going to end up, like on the back of a book. But thank you. And so thank you all for sharing so much.
There's a wonderful comment from Kate, from the mother, in the chat about how as translators, in many ways, you are the actors of our own texts. And I totally agree with you. As I was actually listening to Sophie talk about the voices that inhabit you as you're translating. Yeah, precisely. I mean, there's a very clear performative aspect to translation, isn't it? That the translator is performing these voices, is having to find that stage language, as it were, that book language or that translation language to bring those voices in alive in the target language. So it's very, very much the case that we think in terms of voice a lot when we are translating. And there is a question: ever thought of bringing them to the Edinburgh Fringe?
Yes, and have not made much progress with that. But yes, I have. And actually, well, no, the reason I'm laughing is because I'm laughing at myself, because people have said this to me before, and that would, I think that would be a really exciting opportunity. If you know more about that, I'd actually be really keen to hear about it. But that is something I've been thinking about with these plays, and actually with another playwright I work with, Monica Mafia from Argentina, because I think the Edinburgh Fringe also has a kind of international component, so that would be really exciting. So for the moment, that's just confirmed something that I've been thinking about. But if you have anything else to share about that, that'd be really helpful. Thank you.
I've got a question about this question of, like, you know, proposing to the organisers of the Edinburgh Fringe must be quite a challenge if you haven't got a source of funding. I suppose that it comes down to funding, doesn't it, Sophie?
Yeah, and sometimes it comes down, this is going to sound really boring, but kind of to processes, you know, sometimes different application processes, what you might be eligible for, what certain people what you might be eligible for, to then maybe to even apply for funding, to then be able to develop the performance fully, to even propose it for something like the Edinburgh Festival. And I think that's really important to underline, that in working with artists, I always try where possible, and this is something that Catherine taught me when I was doing my PhD, and I stick to it, to try to be able to pay artists and actors to do the work, and to make sure that that they receive payment for their work, which they obviously should. And so that, yeah, often it's about funding, often it's about what you're eligible for, sometimes it's about who even has to submit the play for a particular thing. So, you know, I've translated stuff around the plays for other types of application processes. So there are lots of things that have to be taken into account, I think.
Great, thank you for clarifying. But it's good to hear that at least there is the beginning of a project here, and something that you might want to look into in the future. There is a question someone posted in the chat, actually, about similarities, as we were mentioning earlier on, between plays, between this play here and other plays by other Latin American writers. So, you know, what are the differences as well? What you know, I think what I see in this question is the challenge of generalizing and putting into this bag, you know, Latin American writers and Latin American plays, as if it were possible at all to do so. Yeah, so over to you, Sophie. I mean, I don't know if you want to make a comment to that, or does anybody want to make a comment? Certainly, we can talk. I mean, having worked very recently on a project that focused on the translation of post-conflict literature, I realized, post-conflict literature, Latin American literature, and very soon I thought, no, I'm going to narrow this down, and I'm going to think only of post-2000, you know, and I'm going to think about 3 countries only, because it's very difficult and very challenging to use the term Latin American as it were something we could, you know, say about Latin American theatre in one go, or Latin American literature in one go, or post-conflict literature in the whole of Latin America. I think it's always better to sort of be more specific. Yeah, I mean, I suppose this question could be reframed slightly. If I were to ask you, Sophie, did you, as you were translating these plays, in particular working through your PhD years, were you reading other Latin American plays? And if so, which were those plays? I think that probably is
that's quite a big question. But yeah, I mean, my training is in Latin American studies. So I was reading widely. I was participating in Out of the Wings and other reading groups, but Out of the Wings particularly looks at Latin American and theatre from Spanish and Portuguese speaking worlds in translation and in the original language. So I was reading widely and watching performances. I obviously spent time. Well, I lived in Uruguay, but I spent time there. You know, I was doing lots of research, and I suppose one of the points of this book is really to demonstrate that translation is a process of research, which is something that I really believe. But I suppose in terms of context, that's why why each of these plays that are translated, I put them in dialogue with another Uruguayan play. So to look at that broader context and look at similarities in themes and questions, to open it up a bit more, and to situate it in that Uruguayan context in the first instance, but of course open up possibilities for those links across Latin American theatre and theatre from other places as well. So I think that's how it specifically fed into the book. And I think that wide reading and that wide sort of viewing and encounter with plays in lots of different ways was so important. I don't know if Catherine or Gail want to say anything about that as well, in terms of sort of Latin American theatre more broadly, or the idea of it, if they're...
Well, I thought that was a brilliant part of your book too, the dialogue between the two plays, and the total focus on Uruguay is wonderful, because there are so few books published exclusively on Uruguayan theater. There is one other that I know of, but it doesn't include translations. That other book is by Sarah Meismer, and it's also a great book. But yours is so different because of all the things we've already discussed, and it just makes a great contribution to Latin American studies for so many reasons. Yeah.
Thank you, Gail.
Yeah.
Catherine, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how to answer or to respond to Mark's question. I suppose I didn't make any real reference to other plays, but I think my answer would be along the lines of what you said, Ceci. It's incredibly, well, it's impossible to talk about Latin American theatre, you know. And I think, you know, we can only talk about these things from, you know, from one place to another. That the Latin America is classified in such way, and you know, there's an understanding of certain things that are happening in Latin America. But if you go to each country, theatre is going to be very different. You know, people write in different ways. You know, of course, the theatre form as it's written, you know, it's a European form in many ways. It's not an indigenous form, but as it grows, you know, and takes root across Latin America, it takes many different forms. There's a hybridity there that's working. There's a real sense of challenge, you know, and the great Latin American writers and theorists of theatre and practitioners are very aware of that. They're very aware of how they are using a European form to change it, to make it into whatever it happens to be across the continent, you know. And they're not necessarily talking, you know, it's also historical. There's a great historicity to that. You know, there might be a moment in the 60s, 50s, 60s, particularly in the 60s, when there's a sense of a Pan-American impulse, you know. But, and then, you know, one of the great things about 70s theatre across Latin America was the different festivals that were going on, and the amounts of, for example, amateur theatre festivals, or theatre aficionado, you know, that were generating hundreds of plays, for example, so it's very complex to answer that question, and I think in a way I wouldn't want to answer it from a Eurocentric point of view. I think what we've been thinking about is what is this play as a piece of work, what does it say, and of course those comparisons, because of the context, are going to be made. But I think what is very specific about this is what I said before, so I won't repeat it, that sort of place of tension and a counter historical push in terms of memory. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Catherine. Yeah, I just wanted to say that a very important question, which is, if you want to buy the book, purchase the book in any way, ebook is already available, and Sophie has actually copied and pasted the link in the chat. And also the very good news that those who want to contact the editor directly to obtain a 50% discount on orders through libraries and institutions, they can do so by contacting Graham Nelson. So that's very, very good news. Thank you. Thank you for putting that in the chat.
Thank you, Legenda, for supporting it, and for BCLT for making this event possible in so many different ways. Yeah, that 50% is for the hardback, but it is already available at ebook as an ebook, and of course you can find it through other suppliers, which I'm not going to enumerate here, but you know the ones, and you can find those as well. There we go.
Okay, I know that we are already past our time, so I want to say a very, very heartfelt thank you to everyone, especially Sophie, and to Gail and Catherine, and to the actors Lanna, Kate and Richard, and a very warm thank you to Robert as well, who tried and tested the book in the classroom, and also to BCLT, to Lily and Anna, who have been managing the Zoom. Thank you very much, everyone, and I hope that you have enjoyed this event as much as I have. And thank you, Sophie.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks very much.